My dad left when I was 6, and then my mother left when I was 13. So I was on my own from when I was 13, and that has a very particular effect on you. I just faded out of existence, I would say, and I spent most of my time hiding. From really early in my life, I've wanted to have control of my environment. I dreamt always of having my own house and my own space and peace. I think peacefulness is very important to me, and not too many people, not too much activity. The idea of a garden where there's a lawn with stuff around the edge does my head in, because why would you want to sit in a kind of blast zone of grass? I want to be in amongst the plants and everything that they've got to offer, you know, the bees, the smells, the brushing against things, you know, it's so nice. I feel lucky to have had a crazy life, really.
Hi, Jinny.
Hi, Matt.
Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I didn't know what to expect today because actually your home is not somewhere that's really online. It's not publicly available. And I feel massively flattered because I've got here today and you've shown me around the house and it is just phenomenal.
Thank you.
And I don't say that
Thank you.
lightly. I go to a lot of homes. This is just, it really blown me away. So I really appreciate it.
Gosh, thank you.
Well, the tour will be available to subscribers on Patreon, as always. I know you very sweetly are a subscriber yourself, so you'll be able to watch yourself.
Oh, God, I probably won't do that.
I'm dying to ask you about this house, but we always, start at the beginning. So tell me where you grew up.
I grew up in Royal Leamington Spa, which is a very beautiful Georgian spa town. And I have family from Birmingham, so a facet of my family are Welsh Quakers and had built Birmingham. And then as that sort of dynasty was sort of fading, people still lived in and around the area. And so my parents, when they got married, lived first in Worcestershire in a tiny village, and then they moved to Leamington because it's sort of spitting distance to Edgbaston, where everybody else was. And so I kind of grew up in this extraordinarily beautiful place. And one of my first ever school projects when I was 5 was, and I was trying to find the book to show you, was a treatise on the new built town, because I became really fascinated by the fact that the place was so complete and so beautifully laid out, and that you could still find the original sort of 16th century cottages, of which there were 4 that were the original bit of the town. And then the whole thing had sort of expanded when spa water became popular. It had a very particular spa water with lots of magnesium in it, and a pump rooms and the bathhouses, which I used when I was older, living on a boat. And so we grew up in this very beautifully proportioned place, and I think it had an intense effect on me.
Go on, tell me.
Well, I mentioned I have this sort of synesthesic thing, and I'm very affected by proportion. So being born and brought up in a beautiful place doesn't really prepare you for horribleness.
For the outside world.
No.
Yeah.
And so I remember once being in the back of the car with my dad, and it was pre-seatbelt, so I used to stand behind him with my arms around his neck while he was driving. We were driving to Stratford, and I suddenly saw this row of 30s terraced houses, and there was something about this oblique angle and the monotony of how they looked that really affected me, and I threw up down the back of his neck. So
You're kidding?
no.
Hang on. So you had that reaction to...
It's so violent.
To the built environment?
Yeah. Really dramatic. And he said very quietly, "Couldn't you have warned me?" And I think, and I couldn't have done. It wasn't that the houses were horrible. There was just something kind of very unfamiliar and unsettling about the way Do you know how they sort of stack terraced houses sort of obliquely down those roads in the 30s? They were very odd.
And it's important to say here, what you're not saying is it's not a snobbery thing. What you're saying, because actually this house here, it's not an enormous house. It's not a palace. It's the proportions of the house itself are pretty modest. We're in your studio here, which is
Yeah,
very tall,
yeah.
but the house itself, the rooms are modest in scale. It's not a very big garden.
No.
But you were saying to me outside that there's something about the rectilinear nature of spaces, whether they're indoors or outdoors, that somehow calms you or settles you down. Can you explain that?
Yes, I mean, I don't know. It's instinctive. I think it's funny because it isn't to do with size and light and things. This is actually quite. We're in a barn and it's quite dark. But the proportions of this house are very well considered. I mean, the architect of this house was a notable modernist and really knew what he was doing. So I think where there's that level of consideration, somehow it helps one feel comfortable and at peace. Whereas, I don't know what the current house building that's going on in this country is doing to people. I don't like it. I don't like the way inadequate thinking and inadequate detailing is being pushed onto the population in this mania for having houses. Why not dignify people with something good? And there was that thought, even the Victorians, I don't like the proportions of Victorian houses, but there was a sort of desire to dignify people with how they lived and where they lived, I think.
You mentioned your synesthesia.
Oh, yeah. Wish I hadn't now.
Yeah.
Can't describe it.
Yeah, go on. So, well, what's the definition of synesthesia, firstly?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I mean, it's a sort of scrambling of the senses. There's probably a sensible way of describing it, but it affects different people differently. So you can hear music and get weird tastes in your mouth, or you can, it's just strange dissonances with your sensory perception, really. But mine has a lot to do with colour and space and proportion. So, and less to do with sound, really. So I'm very sensitive to colour. And I don't know, you might have noticed when we're going around the garden, there isn't tons of colour. I quite like green. I quite like form of things. And I don't want too much. I can get overloaded quite quickly
Okay.
if there's too much going on. Sound odd because you've walked around the house and there's quite a lot going on, but it's quite considered and carefully put together.
Is it the fact that it's under your control somehow?
Yes, and I think from really early in my life, I've wanted to have control of my environment. Really, from when I was really small, I dreamt always of having my own house and my own space and peace. I think peace is very peacefulness is very important to me, and not too many people and not too much activity. Really.
Does this relate to something from your childhood? Do you think a particular event or the way that you were brought up, or is it instilled in you from birth? What do you think?
Yeah, I had it's very difficult to describe my upbringing. It was extremely stimulating on lots of levels. It was also extremely traumatic. And both of my parents were war children. They're both from emigre families. So this is all a post-rationalization for me. I became a psychologist, and you don't do that for the unmitigated joy of madness. You do it for a reason. So,
Yeah. Sounds fair.
yeah. And so I think quite a large proportion of my younger life was spent trying to get to grips with what on earth had been going on in the human element of my upbringing with my parents. My dad left when I was 6, and then my mother left when I was 13. So I was on my own from when I was 13. And that has a very particular effect on you, really. And I think I'm not being particularly articulate about this, but it's somehow difficult to know who you are when you're a child, and there's a lot of traumatic stuff going on around you. And because I'm quite quiet, I just faded out of existence, I would say, and I spent most of my time hiding. I've spoken to a good friend of mine who's a historic buildings architect, and we had very similar experiences as kids, where you have a very volatile, kind of quite narcissistic mother. You become quiet and you become observant. So I used to just sort of hide and look at things in great detail. So my favorite place in the house was under the piano, and I could spend hours and hours and hours under there. Really, I found it very comforting. And I said to you outside, I still like to make places where you can go and kind of be completely still and quiet and not found.
Wow, that's such a powerful image. God, there's a lot
Oh,
to
is
talk
it?
about. Well, yeah, I
Uh,
mean, the idea of that your child like self being, you know, yeah, contained under a piano.
mm,
That sounds a lot. I mean, so your father left when you were 6.
mm.
Have you had? Do you know why?
Yes, I mean, my mother was quite volatile. Um, Actually, who knows? Actually, I mean, who really knows what goes on between the adults when you're a child?
Mm.
There were 4 of us kids. My little brother was 9 months old. My eldest brother was 13, and I was 6. And then I have a second brother who was 11. And I just imagine he'd had a terrible time, my dad. He'd been very, very ill as a young man during the war. And I think probably he'd never felt like he'd lived. And so he ran off with a flame haired opera singer.
Okay.
Yeah. Who turned out we believe to be schizophrenic. So that didn't last very long. Um, and I think he just wanted to, I don't know, I think he probably wanted to live a life that wasn't, they got married very young. I think mum was 22 when they got married and had 4 kids. And then he wanted to be an inventor. He was an inventor.
Yeah. What did he invent?
He invented all sorts of things. He was also very musical. So he wrote various operas that were published. He worked for Massey Ferguson. He designed tractors, and he was desperate to be a farmer. But he came from a very academic family, and my grandfather didn't want him. Legend has it that Grandpa said, "Couldn't you at least be a dentist?" Which is a dagger through the heart
Yeah.
of somebody who wants to make things.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
making, I mean, we're all right these days being makers, but it wasn't considered a suitable job, was it? I mean, it was very judgmental times, really. Anyway, so he made tractors while we lived together. I mean, he was extraordinary. So he would make a full working scale model of a tractor about this big for the royal show on the kitchen table. Very, very detailed. So I think I got into detail with him. So he was an engineer, and he also invented an early word processor, which he was very excited about. He would say, look at this, you can type and you can rub it out with a little liquid crystal display and like that. I was going, wow.
How amazing.
How amazing. But couldn't you just be nice to us for a bit?
Oh.
So I think there was that dissonance. So I have a very low expectation of other human beings in terms of care or protection or anything like that. But I don't ultimately think it harmed me, because I became very interested in other things. I just became interested in light, landscape, music, the written word. I love reading. And I think if you don't feel well formed as a human, you start to find your own way of finding out who you are. And I started mapping. So I think I've been mapping since I was very small. So, to wit, the book about Leamington, and wanting to do this, getting really involved as a 5-year-old in the construction of the town I lived in. It's kind of retrospectively, quite a weird thing to be interested in, but I found it very settling. I loved the fact that the Georgians had thought, well, if, the main parade runs here and it runs north-south up this incline with a river at the bottom, and then radiating off from that, you have the lesser streets, and the house sizes are proportioned to the configuration of this town. You must understand all this.
Yeah, yeah.
You've brought up with it too, I imagine. And it becomes really fascinating. So my favourite book when I was little was the new Larousse mythology, and I'd just read about all the mythologies. I can't remember any of it now, but I used to know them all inside out. And I thought how interesting that, the Sumerians and the Scandinavians have the same gods. They've got the same archetypes. They've all got the same personality archetypes running through them. And I suppose that's why ultimately I became a Jungian, because it made a lot of sense to me.
I see. So your surname Blom,
Yeah.
where does that come from?
Well, it's Scandinavian. I've got a family tree upstairs, which is longer than the table. And it's fascinating. So on the French side of my family, we all know each other. Everybody knows each other. Nobody ever stops talking. On the Scandinavian side, nobody knows each other and nobody ever started talking. But they wrote it all down. so, so that's the difference. Yeah.
So you said that you were 13 when your mum left.
She went back to France with my little brother. Yeah.
Okay, so leaving you and
Me.
just you.
Just me.
Are you serious? On your own?
On my own.
Where were you living?
I lived with the neighbours. So I had this really weird displacement. So my neighbours were academics. My mother thought if somebody was an academic, that made everything all right, because she'd always wanted to be one. But it didn't actually make everything all right. You can't leave a 13-year-old girl alone in a bedsit in somebody else's house with no income and no food. It doesn't bode well. So I had quite a difficult time, really. And I think through it, I sort of realised that you have to take responsibility for yourself, and I didn't really trust other people very much, if I'm honest.
You must have had to grow up very quickly.
Yeah. Yes, and at the same time, you're a very naive, child. I mean, I look at 13-year-olds. I quite often look at 13-year-old girls and marvel at, it's a very weird time in a child's life, because you're not really a teenager yet. You're not really hitting puberty properly, or you might be, but you are very much a child.
Well, it's funny you say that, because my eldest daughter, Indigo, is 13.
Is she?
So seeing it through that lens is horrifying for me, because Indigo is, as you described, she's sort of discovering herself now. I think in a way that's probably not happened before, but at the same time, she still goes to bed cuddling her little rabbit.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you're still a child.
You are. And all these things that are surging through your body and coming at you from the outside world are a lot to process, an awful lot to process. So I was having to sort of get myself up, go to school. I was very badly bullied, because people don't like kids who are odd. And so I was odd, and then I discovered that a lot of people would say that they were round at my house to their parents so that they could get away with going and doing whatever they were doing. And I found, for a quiet child, I became very quiet, really, and sort of sank into nothing. And then they didn't come back for ages, not ages. And this was pre-mobile phones. There was no communication. So I got a job at the weekend. So I survived on my school lunches. I went to a liberal arts school. So that was also kind of, had I been in a more kind of normal school, perhaps somebody might have said something. But this was the 70s, so nobody was talking about anything to do with how you look after your children,
Yeah.
that came later. But if you can imagine anything that your imagination might describe as going wrong for a 13-year-old on their own, it went wrong. So I had a pretty horrific time of it. And then when my mother came back, I was 16, and I moved to live with a friend of mine, and she went absolutely postal. I mean, she lost it because she was very controlling. So that sort of thing of being very controlling and very neglectful is a weird dichotomy that I've never really kind of got to grips with. I mean, I have now, but and it's funny because I started thinking about, well, why is she the way she is? And I think it was a lot to do with her abandonment because her parents sent her to England when she was 6 and didn't see her again until she was 18.
Are they still alive, your parents?
No.
No. Did you ever ask your mum why she left you at that age?
There were some conversations that just weren't worth having. And we were very weirdly, we were very close, and at the same time, we're completely different people. And she's quite a damaging person to be around. And it's funny because the Rosalie de Merrick paintings that I was showing you in the house, Rosalie de Merrick was that kind of mother. And when I read her daughter's book about growing up with her, I thought, I'm never going to have to write this down because Julia's done such an absolutely standout job of describing these people who are fascinating. I mean, my mother was fascinating in a million different ways, and if you met her, you would agree. So it's very difficult to only see it through a prism of damage and misery because there was so much more to it than that. And yeah.
One of the things that's so interesting about this is that you started off by describing growing up in very grand, beautiful surrounds.
Most certainly.
And it's incredible, isn't it, that on the surface can be so at odds with what's happening underneath.
Oh, totally. Perfect table manners.
Yeah.
I know which knife and fork to use. Middle. She liked to say upper middle class standards will get you a long way.
Okay.
So she was quite a snob.
Yeah.
But our family was on a downward trajectory, in terms of everything. And when Dad went, he took all the money. So, she was a redoubtable woman. I mean, she suddenly out of nowhere went from cocktail parties and couture to driving a butcher's van and turning our beautiful Georgian house, became a guest house. So we were suddenly sort of surrounded by people we'd never met before. And I found it all very destabilizing, but I just went quiet. And I remember reading about Ariadne's thread, and I remember thinking, right, that's me. I've just got to fix I remember I was quite small, and I was thinking, all I need to do is grow up, because then I'll be able to make my own decisions and my own choices, and then it'll be fine. So I'm lucky that I had that streak, and that's what I've done. And I come from a singular family on all sides. They're nonconformists, socialists. The Danish lot, the same. The very you have to make your own path in life kind of people. So I don't have a close family of immediate human beings now, but I feel very much part of this collective of people who've had to do extraordinary things with themselves.
Yeah.
And I really like that. It's kind of comforting.
As you were talking, I was thinking about a conversation I had with Julia Samuel, the psychotherapist, and she was saying how, I suppose, a third of emotion sits on the surface and 2/3 sits kind of underneath, which I thought was a really interesting way of looking at it, like an iceberg. And I have a really clear picture of you, as you say, learning to conform, learning to have the manners and do things in the right way, but also such a complex inner life you must have had.
Yeah. I've got a very big inner life.
I bet you have.
Yeah. And Yeah, I mean, I'm a true introvert,
Yeah.
really, and I think people find me a bit odd. I think people have always. I've got used to the fact that people find me odd.
Do you think that they do?
Um,
How do they show that?
or maybe it could be me. I don't really have a great deal of understanding of how society works, how people hang out with each other. I've never had. I think being bullied makes you wary of people.
Do you have close friends?
Yes, but not. I don't see people a lot. Mark and I are very close, and we see each other a lot. And we're quite similar. We don't need a great deal of external
Mm,
stimulation. Yeah, no, I mean, I've got some really amazing, fascinating, good friends,
mm,
but I'd rather have a deep and long lasting relationship.
mm.
One of my best friends is an artist called Cathy Haynes. She's extraordinary. We've been through extraordinary things together. We've known each other for 30 years, and we don't see each other that often, but it's very deep and profound. And
Okay, so the depth of the relationship is an important element.
yeah,
Yeah,
for me,
I get
yeah,
that. I get that.
yeah.
Okay, well, so let's move on to you mentioned, you touched on it, but you went into psychology, psychotherapy, didn't you, initially? Is
Mm.
that right, professionally?
Yeah, I mean, because I was on my own from such a young age, I couldn't do anything in the normal route. So I've always worked. I've been working since my Saturday jobs when I was 13, and then I didn't go off the rails. I've been seeking things all my life, and so I was a good old-fashioned stoner for quite a long time. That was my first career, you might say. And and then I was doing a bit of plumbing with a friend of mine, and I decided that I needed a trade. So I thought I'll go and learn HND plumbing. Then I can always have a job. I needed a portable
Mm.
skill, I felt. So I signed up to go to the local FE to do plumbing. And when I got there, my mother was still in France at this point. They went, "Oh no, 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 you're not. Your name's not on this course." And I said, "Well, it must be." And they went, "No, no, no, you're. I'll leave it with us." "Oh yeah, no, you're doing drama." I said, "What?" I said, "No, I'm not. I'm doing plumbing." "No, no, it says here on your forms." And then I noticed the unmistakable hand of my mother, who had altered the course. No daughter of mine's going to be a plumber. And she'd signed me up to the drama theatre studies
Wow, that is
course.
quite narcissistic, isn't it?
Yep,
Mm,
yep, very.
mm,
So I did it, and during it, I couldn't act. If you haven't got a sense of who you are, you can't pretend to be somebody else, I think is the fundamental thing. So I got very involved in doing all the sets. I did the sets, the lighting, and the sound. And I realized that I very much like making the environment in which other people perform. And I
mm.
didn't know at the time, but that is actually what clearly I'm doing now. But also, I wanted to do art and drama therapy, I thought. But at that stage, you had to have an arts degree, a science degree, and then do a further thing to become a therapist. Well, I mean, I just couldn't. I hadn't got any money. I was living in my flat with my friend Ian, and another very important place for us both, really. So it started a long old journey, really, and lighting and sound and sets, that was fine. From there, I went to live in France. From France, I came back here. Um, then I moved to London and opened a shop, had a deli. Then I met my ex, and we bought our first house, which I've still got in South London.
Okay.
And then his ex-wife, she was an ex-addict and she was working with ex-addicts.
Mm.
And we met, and she was French. And she said, "Oh, Jinny, you should be a therapist." And I said, "Oh, yeah." And she said, "Yeah, yeah, I went to this course, but it's shit for me, but you could do it." And so, so I went, "Yeah, okay." And I went off and I ended up joining this training, and I became a transpersonal psychologist and psychotherapist, and that took me 9 years. And at the same time, she'd also got a job working at this charity in Brixton, working with people with psychosis. And she went, "Oh, I hate this job, but it'd be really good for you." So Brigitte, in her extraordinary way, actually just put me exactly where I needed to be. It was quite extraordinary, actually.
It's obviously what you needed, though.
Yeah. And that's happened to me a lot. I mean, things like that have happened a lot. And I think it's really important to keep your eye out for people, oneself, and help people in that way, actually, because everybody's looking for something and not necessarily clear on it. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so how long were you a therapist for?
Well, I wasn't in the traditional sense. I worked in this residential charitable trust for men with schizophrenia and PTSD and OCD, the real thing. I find it very difficult when people talk about mental health problems like it's having a verruca,
Sure.
because
Yeah,
it
this-
isn't.
So this sounds pretty hardcore.
This was hardcore.
Yeah.
And we had 3 residential houses in Brixton. And I've always felt that, I mean, you need to be in it, you really need to be in it. And I think anyone who goes into that line of work definitely has stuff to sort out for themselves. And I think the really critical thing is own it, know it, know the difference between what you're experiencing and what the other person is experiencing. Because I think there's a lot of very unfortunate transference that goes on.
Okay.
And so one of my good skills was I was very good at hiring people that weren't mad, because quite a lot of crazy people apply for jobs in places. I mean, the thing you're attracted to the thing that you are, if you like. So you have to be quite vigilant in all of these childcare or mental health or any of these things. You have to be careful. So I did that for 12 years.
Oh, wow.
And I started off as a part-timer and I became co-director. It was amazing. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
And from there, you pivoted to landscape.
Yes, I did. And I did because, well, I mean, it's very difficult to describe a life because so many things happen simultaneously. And at the same time I was doing that, the majority of my friends were gay, and the majority of them had HIV and full-blown AIDS. And so Ian, who I mentioned, who I was at drama college with, he became very ill. We were very close. Terry, our other best friend, he turned up on the doorstep where I was working one day, having a full-blown breakdown, because he'd been diagnosed, and he hid under my desk. There's quite a lot of hiding under things in my life. I don't hide under things anymore. And I had to hoik him out, stick him in the ambulance and drive him off to Lighthouse and get him looked after, and he died shortly after. Then Ian became very, very sick, and so did his partner. And, it was very stigmatizing. And so I was the only person who knew they were both ill, because his partner was very much in the public eye and didn't want it known. And so that was quite difficult. So, yeah, that was all going on. My partner had become a drug addict, unbeknownst to me, and I was running a charity with 40 schizophrenic guys, and it became quite a lot. And so I ploughed on through it. All my friends died. All my 4 closest friends died, and my 4 pets died within months of each other, which was quite a lot. And then I sort of suddenly thought, actually, I don't feel right. So John and I went on holiday to the Picos de Europa in Spain, and I had a prophetic dream, which I wrote about in my book. And I was in a stadium full of people. It was a Madonna concert, actually, and everyone was screaming, and this little person was trying to say something to me. And I said, "What is it?" And they said, "Please, can I be a gardener?" And so I thought, bloody hell. And I woke up and said to John, "I've just had this mad dream, please can I be?" And he said, "Well, why don't you just do it then?" And after that, everything just sort of fell into place, and it all happened. And so I went back home, handed my notice in, which was kind of a big deal because I was director, and became a gardener.
Wow. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, well, it's as mad as that.
How would you explain, because you've done a lot of work around, nature and therapy kind of combined. How do you personally explain that link between how a landscape can make someone feel better?
I mean, one of the things that really struck me was when Ian was ill, and one of the reasons I still do a lot of work at Chelsea and Westminster, it's a phenomenal hospital. And so the big AIDS ward was in Chelsea and Westminster, which was a new hospital in the late 80s. I think it opened in 1990, so round about then. And one of the things was that the room he was in it's very nicely situated, that hospital, because it's in Fulham and it's very close. It's not high. It's not a big high building, and it's a modern building, so it had good windows. And he was lying in bed, sort of parallel to the crown of a big sycamore tree. So you got this sort of beautiful sky with you could see the sky, and you could see all the birds flying, these flocks of sparrows and things, and the wind moving the sycamore tree and everything. He was lying, literally skeletally unto death in bed. And just that thing of being able to see the non-prescriptive nature of nature, the light changing, the clouds changing, you can't predict it, you can't tell what's coming next. And going back to the garden outside, there's something about the window frame, the framing of that with the physical structure of the hospital, and then with this moving life going on outside. I think something very profound happens to a human being. And I notice it now because we've just built a garden for the ICU, that people want to go and die in the garden. They want to go and be in the garden that we've built. It's inside, it's an indoor garden. But there's something about it, just knowing that this is a bigger thing than you, that it needs nurturing, it needs care and all of that sort of thing. It just seems to have a very profound effect.
Yeah, couldn't agree
people.
more. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the idea, isn't it, that we're somehow we're a living organism like plants are, and we're part of that ecosystem, and we will sort of, in the end, we'll just kind of decompose into the ground.
Yes, there's sort of safety in mortality somehow for me. I said to you earlier, my mother thought she was immortal, like Ursula Andress in She. And
it doesn't surprise me now you told me more about it.
Like going, yeah, well, we know you're going to live forever, Mom, but in the unlikely event that something happens, what shall we do with your mortal remains? So,
but you also said that you do not feel like that. So how do you feel about mortality?
I feel fine about it.
Yeah,
I feel fine about it. I've had 3 near misses, so I kind of, we go to sleep at night, we're unconscious. You might never wake up again. Would you know the difference? I don't think you would. So just enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I love being alive, but I'm not going to panic about not being.
Yeah. We've got to talk about this house.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about this place. When does it date from, actually, this house, first of all?
Oh, the barn is from 1593, which was the year Richard III was first performed in London.
Wow.
Which we quite like the thought of.
How amazing.
Isn't it?
Yeah. A quick interlude to let you know that there's a house tour to accompany this episode, which is available to insiders on Patreon. Here's a short preview. I think this might be my ideal bedroom.
Oh, really? Well,
it's just, the proportions are really lovely.
They are.
I really like the structure of the roof and the way it holds you somehow, and then everything channels you out, doesn't it?
Yeah. Because it's absolutely dead east facing.
Right, perfect.
It's pretty amazing. So we just get the blast of the sun in the morning. And it's very nice having a balcony.
Definitely.
So we go out there and have coffee. This is by a man called Manuel Marin. And he's Spanish, and he made a lot of Calder's mobiles for him. Yeah. So it's not a Calder, but it's a real connection.
It's the man behind Calder.
It's the man behind Calder.
How brilliant.
You know, and that is John Farnsworth, who was the man behind Henry Moore, and who I met because I did the Moore Foundation landscaping years and years ago. I went the other day and they've changed it all, which is what happens. But he was a lovely man.
I described it earlier on as having some quite small rooms, and what I mean by that is there's an intimacy to it, and I suppose it does remind me a little bit of Kettle's Yard in Cambridge, and that's partly because you have so much art on the walls and also, you know, small maquettes on surfaces. You know, you're obviously great collectors, so tell me about the art and why that's important to you.
Oh, it's so important. I collected a few things before Mark and I met. And then, as I said to you, we didn't want to live, when we decided we were going to live together, which sounds like we decided it, but we'd actually bought this house before we'd ever lived together. So as we drove up the motorway here to here, we thought, well, what are we doing? Because we hadn't actually discussed it.
So you bought the house before you decided to live together?
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. I think we'd sort of obviously cottoned onto the fact that we were going to have a go. But and then suddenly some of the stuff from my house in London made sense here. And I knew Kettle's Yard, but also, as I said, Louisiana in Denmark. And when I lived in Denmark, I lived in a modern house with white painted brick, and it's that Danish thing.
Yeah.
And then if you think about it, places like Snape, you know, all of that kind of runs through me. My family were involved in Snape maltings and things like that. And also Coventry. When I was a kid, Coventry was being built after the war, and the cathedral. And I remember going over there and just like really not being able to, I couldn't bear it.
Oh, really?
I sort of couldn't bear it. I sang in a choir, and I'd have to go and sing in Coventry Cathedral about once a month. And there was something about it. It's so strong and it's so intentional. And that Jacob Epstein angel is, you know, it's quite a lot for a kid, really. But there was something about the completeness, and that it's really interesting how that sort of rises, you know, and Mark's had a similar experience, thanks to your family, really, and of the library in Ilford and places like that. These modernist things, the Barbican, all of it kind of sinks into you. And there was something in here, in this house, that we both recognised, and it just set us off on this art buying spree. And nothing cost very much, I hasten to add. You know, like he's a very good sleuth. Like we've got these Ras Rasmussen sculptures up there. They're the first spun aluminium sculpture.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're amazing. So he finds this extraordinary stuff.
So it sounds like Mark is into it from a kind of academic standpoint as well.
You know, if you think his career in music was finding talent, you know, he's an A&R man, so he's been finding. And what is that? You know, he's looking for the thing in somebody else that is going to make them a star.
Make them a star.
You know,
So,
yeah,
who did he work for?
He found the Spice Girls.
Did he really?
Yeah, in a pub in Essex. Natalie Imbruglia. He figured out having a really beautiful girl lying naked on the floor might be a good idea.
Wasn't she in a soap opera?
She was in something like Neighbours or something,
yeah.
But then he and Phil Thornalley made that song Torn for her. So he would do things like that, you know, find people and max them out, really.
Okay.
Cheryl Cole, heard of her?
Really?
Yeah. I mean, all sorts. I don't really know. We don't talk about it very much. And then by the time we met in singing in a choir that I'd been going to for ages, an a cappella choir, which is run by Brian Eno. So, yeah, because I sing. And then Mark turned up one day, and I just thought he was a fun, entertaining person, and the rest is history. And I don't know, there's something, he's just very creative. So I think if he follows a theme of something, so it's less academic, the academic bit almost follows it, because he then does have a kind of academic streak of following it up and learning a lot, and then that'll make connections. And he's gone down some very interesting little avenues and alleyways.
What's the thrust of the art collection? I mean, what are the parameters?
The parameters are, there's quite a healthy dose of English surrealism, which is nobody's been particularly interested in, but now they are.
Okay.
He's sort of at the vanguard of things, because quite a lot of the stuff he's found we bought for next to nothing, because we haven't got lots of money. And now it's really hit some sort of zeitgeist. So really, I think it's from the end of the Second World War up to pop art is our region.
Mainly British or all sorts?
A lot of British, quite a lot of emigre, and quite a lot of women we've discovered, you know, a surprising amount. So now we're going to do a book. Why not?
A book about the art collection. Yeah.
Still forming that, yeah.
I'd love to ask you about the garden, and it's not a big plot. It seems to me it's about psychological safety. That's what I took from it. And I think, obviously hearing your story now makes a huge amount of sense. But just talk us through that. I mean, for people that sort of haven't seen it pictured, how would you describe how it upholds safety?
Oh, well, safety can be structured. So I think it's a highly structured space. So it's a barnyard. So the barn has this square yard in front of it, 30 metres by, I think, 35 by 35. So it's not huge. And we have lowish stone walls around it on all sides. One element of safety is being able to see what's coming. So I'm a bit of a kind of medievalist in that sense. You need to be able to see your attacker coming marauding over the. But I've got quite a lot of my lexicon from French medieval villages, really, because they built. Well, in the medieval period, everybody built in a kind of way that kept you secure. So it is in the build. So you have these low walls, which means you can see what's coming. It's also quite nice because that's not claustrophobic. So there's a sort of solar plexus height, which is probably about 1.2 meters for most adults, which I think is the optimum. If you can protect your solar plexus, you can protect yourself.
What a brilliant rule. I love that.
Yeah, that's it. So you can see, which means you can react. And then you can also sink down. If you sit down, you're in a kind of protected space. So a lot of it is the physical structure. And then I think there's something about plants, the proximity, being inside plants. I mean, the idea of a garden where there's a lawn with stuff around the edge does my head in, because why would you want to sit in a kind of blast zone of grass, really? I want to be in amongst the plants and everything that they've got to offer, the bees, the smells, the brushing against things, it's so nice.
That's amazing. It's brilliant. And you've got a strip of water as well, which you describe like a moat.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
What does that do?
Well, water is life. We have to have water. We've got 3 lots of water in the garden. I always have water wherever I go, either in a controlled way or I'm not very good with tech, so I'm not very keen on fountains and techie things like that. But, a massive like that, great big copper, just fill it with water. And then I got a 30 quid solar aerator from Amazon. That's enough for me. And then the other one at the front, I've got this little tiny fountain thing, which I bought for 50 quid from the local pond shop. So I'm not a snob, I mean, it's whatever it'll take to make something work. And then I've got that great big old stone trough at the front, which looks quite barny. And an old guy went past and he said, "Oh, I remember that." He said, "I'm glad you kept that from the original barn." I said, yeah, it was important, wasn't it? But it had turned up on a truck about 3 days earlier. But, but it's a kind of quite a nice thing for him to say because it feels, I like everything to sort of settle into being appropriate
Yeah.
somehow.
How do you describe the relationship between the house and the garden?
Oh, it's really important because I thought for quite a while about it. And, we've lived here for 10 years and I only built the garden last year. So this is its first year. So don't judge it too harshly. It's a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a very structured baby.
Yeah, structured baby. That's it. Well, I mean, really, it's just some simple mathematical rules, and taking the proportions from the old barn doors and dropping them down. I always find something in the architecture is the key to the structure.
Tell me about that then. Okay, so the height of the doors.
The width and the height
Yeah.
is the proportion. So if I'm doing a terrace on a house, I will take the elevation and drop it flat, the proportions of the elevation and just drop it flat. So my terraces often look huge, but then they're very big and livable and they always feel proportionate.
So it's almost like a shadow.
Yes, it's like a shadow. And then they're big enough to put trees in and furniture on and, they're generous at that point as well. But I always find a proportion on the building. And then the little terraces out here mirror really the scale of the rooms inside. So I wanted there to be a familiarity. I had a client in the States once, and she had a few things that I enjoyed. Like she had one type of clock, and she would put it wherever she needed a clock in the house, so that you didn't have to then register a different kind of clock.
Really?
Yeah. And it was weirdly satisfying. We used to talk a lot about this sort of thing. I have great clients. I have really great clients. They're very unusual people.
Well, I bet you do
Yeah,
because
the majority of them are, yeah.
Well, you describe. I mean this in the best way. You've described yourself earlier as someone that you see yourself sitting slightly outside of the norm somehow, and so I think when you feel that way, you inevitably attract other people that are a bit nonconformist.
I think that's true. I think that's true. And also I'm very conscious of the fact, I'm very private. And with the kind of job that I do, you're going right into the absolute core of other people's lives, really. Like, who are you? How do you live? How do you want to live? So what I'm doing isn't commodifying their land or whatever. I'm really doing something quite different, I think, more transformative.
Do you have any other rules like that? You talked about dropping the doors or the facade down.
Rules. I don't know. I'm not very rule based.
Maybe the wrong word, but sort of instincts.
I think I'm very thorough. So I think one of the things when I take on a project that probably might surprise people is I'm not looking to produce a vignette of something in the space. I need to take on the whole thing and do it really from the inside out. So I need to look at everything, the boundaries, the trees, the landscape. I had a bit of a moment the first time I got a digger bucket into the ground and started changing levels, and I got this kind of weird frisson, and I thought, well, no, this is me. I'm a big changer of land. The things that I do are massive. The scale that I work on is monumental. And I think that surprises people because I'm quite quiet about my work. I don't think they realise sometimes the huge scale of it. But I'm happy in that environment. So I can bring about enormous change. And it is always enormous change to the good because it's amazing how people will change land without thinking about it. So I've just had to restore a whole load of ponds that were sort of hacked into a very beautiful hillside in the 80s. And they were so ugly. I mean, it was like somebody had done them with a digger bucket and just sort of mashed the banks in, with these awful kind of railway embankment kind of revetments all around them. And we've just made them much, much better. So I think it's that that's a healing thing, I suppose, is like think about it, do it once, do it properly, and do it thoroughly, you know.
Mm. So this is a bit reductive in some ways because it's an obvious link to make, but I think it's one we do have to make, and I'd love your thought on it. The upbringing that you had with very unpredictable care,
Yeah,
to put it mildly.
yeah.
How do you feel that that feeds into your work and the way that you try and manipulate the land, like you were talking about, and give structure to the land and reshape nature in that way?
I don't know if that is reductive. It's quite hard to answer. It just matters a lot. You know, I think I was quite put out by the the treatment that I received when I was small, and I haven't got my own children. I mean, for many reasons, but also I think you carry a fear if you are badly brought up. You carry a fear of passing it on. Or not being able to look after things well. And I think that is something that has challenged me, is the fear of not doing things well. And so I think in doing the job that I do it very well. I mean, you know, it's just important. And it's a respect thing, you know, it's a respect for the land. I mean, my family in this country were Quakers and Unitarians, and they do sort of din this stuff into you like a stick of rock, you know, do as you would be done by. And there's a Unitarian thing about protecting the earth on which you tread, you know, and it sort of sticks in your head.
Mm,
They're very simple rules of engagement, if you like,
mm,
and they matter.
mm,
They do matter.
mm. When I spoke with Dan Pearson, he talked about how when he was younger, he felt that the natural world was somehow controllable and behaved in a way that he understood
Hmm.
in comparison to humans who are much more unpredictable.
Yeah, I'd agree with him. I've had that conversation with him too,
Have you?
because we used to work together
Yeah.
years ago. Um, yes, I mean, I totally agree with him, and it is that, you know, it's a bit like having a pet. You know, they're only ever going to be nice to you.
That's true, yeah.
You know, it's the only reason people have dogs, isn't it? Because they
Yeah.
just really like you.
Yeah.
And I think nature and gardens, and there's just something very, the transaction that you have of caring for a garden. But there is something in, you know, the link that you have, which is the thing that I was always scared that I didn't have because of my upbringing, that you could neglect something. I mean, you can't neglect it. You know, if you start growing plants, you can't neglect them. You can't leave them to die in a pot. You know, the something will be pulling you out in the early hours of the morning to go and make sure they're all right.
Mm,
Um, it's a very interesting, and that's why I think it works very well for gardening and PTSD, actually, and for all kinds of serious, you know, I mean, I had the most terrible PTSD when I was young. I mean,
I
really
bet.
terrible, and terrible, terrible panic attacks. And unless you've had terrible panic attacks, you don't really know what they're like, you know.
So what sort of age is this?
Oh, I mean, from when I got left, really. I mean, you know, I was borderline psychotic for probably the first year. And that's why I understand psychosis so well.
Yeah.
And that was my enthusiasm for working with it. I didn't find it frightening at all. I found it a language that you needed to learn. You know, I remember a consultant psychiatrist saying to me, "Oh, you can't do a thing with them other than medicate them." And I
Wow.
just, I saw his fountain pen on his desk and I wanted to stab him with it.
Yeah, too right.
So I'm thinking, you absolute arse. How
Yeah.
can you sit there
Yeah.
and say something as sweeping and stupid as that? You know, you
Mm.
have to learn the language. And actually, funnily enough, that's another thing, like with architecture. I remember reading an architectural monograph when I was about 15, thinking, what the hell is this language? You know, this is gibberish. What are they talking about? And then I realized it is another language, you know, so you just need to learn these other languages,
Mm.
really.
Yeah.
So I've learnt architecture, I've learnt people. learnt plants. It's not bad.
Well, another big theme here, of course, is loss.
Well, yes. I mean, I think I sort of hinted at it earlier. The thing is, for me, it's been an enormous motivator. What do you do with grief? So I've had all these losses, starting with Dad disappearing when I was little. Then my generation was a thalidomide generation. So all the way through school, kids were dying. I mean, there weren't that many kids who had full thalidomide symptoms, but there were other symptoms of thalidomide, like terrible asthma and things like that. So my really good friend at school, Sam Bruce, died of an asthma attack.
Mm.
And you just think, blimey, and then John Gerrish died when we were 14. So kids dying, and you don't expect it when you're little. And it makes you feel old, like Methuselah, because what do you do with that? And then I'm the AIDS generation as well. So, when everybody was in their early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, everybody dying. I don't know. It changes you. And I think the AIDS thing, what came out of everybody dying of AIDS for me was a complete reinvention and then needing to really boot it into this new way of life. And I think that's how I process grief. I do something.
Yeah. And are you happy to talk about your brother?
Yeah, my oldest brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we were very, very close. And he, oh God. I mean, you just think, what a waste, what a waste. Don't smoke.
Okay.
Yeah, don't smoke. It's really not worth it.
So what did he die from then?
He died of lung cancer at 53. My dad died at 53. There's a long tradition of my grandfather died at 53. So you either die at 53 or you plough on. Basically, in my family, I've made it over the dangerous hump.
Do you
Clearly.
smoke?
No, I used to. I used to smoke like a chimney. But I gave up. I wrote myself a note that said, cat food, fags, milk. And I looked at it. I thought, what kind of lunatic needs to write down? You can't, you've got to feed the cat. You need milk for tea. And if you're an addict, you don't need to write down the thing you're addicted to. So I thought, maybe I'm not an addict. And that was it. I never smoked again. Bonkers. That was it. I mean, I literally never did. And I was a chain smoking puffer,
But that's presumably because obviously there's a physiological reason why we are addicts, but there's also, of course, the underlying reason often is a social one, or to do with belonging, or what was going on in your life at that time.
Well, I'll tell you what it was for me. I gave up smoking when I finally moved to London. I'd moved to London several times. I was living in squats in Bethnal Green and various other things. And then I finally moved to London after I came back from France and when we opened the shop. And I was living above the shop. And it was the first time that I was sort of dislocated from the society that I had had in Leamington. And I was sort of tired of it all. And I was tired of this sort of, world where everybody becomes quite homogenous and conforms to whatever little group they've got into. And I realised I smoked partly because of the difficulties of my earlier life. I was always terrified that I was going to say something that I shouldn't. And so smoking was a way of kind of almost literally humming your hands over your mouth. And I was quiet anyway. But it's sort of like if you're constantly putting a fag in your mouth, you are literally muffling yourself. And I just thought, I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to bother anymore. And I didn't. And nobody knew me. There was something there's a terrible, I've been very lonely. There have been chunks of my life which have been very lonely. But in that, you actually have the chance to change, So I'm not frightened of changing. And I'm not frightened of being on my own. And it allowed me to completely transform myself and become myself, I think, really.
How interesting.
Yeah.
What age is that then?
I suppose it started in my, by the time I got to my mid-20s, I'd been on my own for, 12 years or something, 13 years. So, yeah, around about then. And it took a while. It takes a while to build yourself up.
That's such an
Yeah.
interesting description of smoking. I've not heard that before, but it makes so much sense. When you say that it was a sort of, you can't say the wrong thing when you got a fag in your mouth, did you go through childhood thinking that you could easily say the wrong thing and the
Yes.
stakes of that were very high?
They were very high stakes, yeah.
Yeah. What? Why?
I'm an abused child. I mean, I might as well say it. I'm a
Yeah.
very badly abused child, and therefore you have the whole load of, the silence that everybody else requires of you, because you could be the undoing of everything, and that's an enormous weight to carry, an enormous weight to carry.
Do you mean if you share your experiences with outsiders? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or with anyone,
Yeah.
yeah. And you're not allowed to, you're not, so being demonized, if you're the person who has had abuse perpetrated upon them, you become dangerous to the people who've done it or who've colluded in it. It's why I was so angry about the Jimmy Savile thing, because I was thinking, well, everybody knew what Jimmy Savile was. What about all those other fuckers at the BBC protecting their pensions,
Mm.
and protecting the world, and protecting themselves? They
Mm.
showed no bravery. They showed no support for the kids. They showed nothing. It's
Mm.
disgusting.
Mm.
And they got away with it. And really, it is all about collusion and not telling the truth. And so I'm a great truth speaker,
Mm. I
you
can
know.
see that.
And I think that's the thing with mental health. I'm really anti-taboo as well. There shouldn't be any taboos. You should be able to, out things, and speak about them, not to punish other people. It's not about that. It's about opening the world up and, having some honesty in it.
Um, as we move to the end of this conversation, I just wanted to bring it briefly to this idea, this word homing.
Yeah.
Of course, there's the bricks and mortar of a home, but it's really about one's internal state. That's what's fascinated me about this conversation. The two things are related, and they're related to landscape as well. But I think you're someone that clearly grew up with a chronic lack of safety, which is really tough. And I think it's very obvious from you describing your panic disorder and so on that you didn't feel at home in yourself. How could you have done?
No, I mean, you dislocate,
Yeah.
at that point. That's why I understand psychosis, because I've lived it.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to kind of re-enter your physical being and walk in safety. And that really is something, that I feel extremely lucky that I've been born with the resources within me to do that, because a lot of people don't have that.
Well, you are an amazing story of triumph over adversity, and
Hey.
yeah, no, you really are. And I'd love to ask you how do you do you feel at home in yourself now?
Oh, yeah,
And
really.
and you can't possibly describe this in a sentence, but what would you say? What are the main things that have contributed to that?
Well, I'll tell you, I can tell you very easily. I think the fact that even though I only had my father for a really short period of time, he loved me and I loved him. And I think when you've experienced love, unconditional love, and real love like that, you don't forget it. And it is unbelievably sustaining,
Hmm.
actually.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons that I wanted to go and do the work that I did when I worked with the guys, not thanks to Brigitte, I got kicked into it. But having got there, I thought all of these guys that I'm working with, because it was just men, have got that same dissonance. And we all, I mean, it sounds absolutely mad, but we really loved each other. We had the most brilliant time together. And that, I think, is like, they're drops of gold, and they can get you through all sorts of stuff.
So you think it's human connection,
Yes,
a feeling of
ultimately.
belonging.
Yeah, ultimately.
Mm,
If you've experienced it, it gives you, there will be part of you that is whole, and then you can build on it.
mm.
Yeah.
Did you see your father after the age of 6 very much?
Not very often. Not very often. I mean, really, certainly not to excuse his behaviour, but I think it would have been very, very difficult for him to come back. He would have had to get past the fury of my mother and the
Mm,
disappointment and the hurt. And so, who's going to want to walk back into that if they're not a very strong person, which he wasn't? And then, weirdly, when she came back from France, they got back together. And I found that really difficult. And then he died. So that was a whole other kind of weird cataclysm. And you just think, bloody hell, I've
mm,
had enough of this,
mm,
actually. I'm
mm.
going to go and do something else.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
lot.
Psychodramas. Yeah.
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 My last question for you.
Yeah.
It's a very special home you have here, and I just wondered if you could put into words for me what it means to you, this place.
Oh, I just love it. I love living here with Mark. We wake up every day and just can't believe our luck, because we both created ourselves out of nothing, really. Um, and it just seems like it's just brilliant. I mean, it's really nice to be able to share it with you. This is the right kind of way to share it, I think,
Mm.
in a way.
I think it is because I think what
Yeah.
you've described today, as you're showing me around, everything has a story behind it. It's
Mm.
it's not it's not about it's not about the way it looks. There's so many layers of meaning here.
Well, I think everybody who's painted in this house is from that period of history.
Mm,
They're all people who are undergoing a crazy amount of change. So all of the stories, are similar. War trauma. Trying to make sense of a new world, trying to be modern, trying to be, what after a war? What do you do? So I think even though that sounds traumatic, it kind of isn't. It's sort of liberating. So I mean, I feel lucky to have had a crazy life, really.
I'm glad. You really could. There could be another outcome from that. But yeah, Ginny, what a great conversation.
Oh,
thank
thanks,
you for
Matt.
being so open and honest,
Oh,
and
well, thanks.
um, it's been a very memorable morning.
Oh, thank you. Well, likewise.